Bret Stephens, let's talk a little bit about what's in this actual set of revisions. I'll give you an example of one of the things that Fadl is saying now. He says, quote, "I say it is not honorable to reside with people, even if they were non-believers and not part of a treaty, if they gave you permission to enter their homes and live with them, and if they gave you security for yourself and your money, and if they gave you the opportunity to work or study, or they granted you political asylum with a decent life and other acts of kindness, and then betray them through killing and destruction. This was not in the manners and practices of the Prophet." This seems addressed to things that have happened, whether in Madrid or London, and seems to be a response that calls to sort of traditional views of how you treat people who have given you hospitality, as opposed to necessarily making grand religious claims.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken. That's clearly addressed to the Mohammed Bouyeris of the world. He's the young Dutch jihadist who murdered the filmmaker Theo van Gogh. And I think you touch on really the deeper point here, which is that there is a kind of traditionalist, conservative aspect to what Dr. Fadl is saying. This is not the work of a man who, say, just read Thomas Jefferson and has come over to the side of the Enlightenment. One of the key points that he makes in those revisions is he says this business in which fathers read that their sons have gone to Iraq and become jihadis, so-called martyrs, that they read about it in the newspaper. He says it has become pandemic in our times. And what I think he means by that is that al-Qaida, by encouraging sons to disobey on occasion their parents, to go and to kill themselves, to burglarize for the sake of their jihad or commit other sorts of crimes, are violating a kind of basic social contract, the real sort of underpinnings of much of the Arab and Muslim world, and should be condemned on precisely that account. So it's a very conservative take on what Islamic obligation is. And I wrote about this several months ago, and I described it as a kind of Thermidorian reaction to the radicalism of al-Qaida, which is to say that this is not a liberal response. This is a conservative response. I would add one point. Things have been changing in the Arab and particularly Muslim world since 9/11, and the most significant change is that while most of the sort of suicidal terrorist acts perpetrated in the world today are perpetrated by Muslim fundamentalists or radicals, most of the victims today are now Muslims too. It was one thing to cheer the events of 9/11 from places like Gaza or Beirut or elsewhere in the Arab world, when the victims were seen as the crusaders, the Zionists, the infidels. It was one thing to celebrate what Hamas was doing with suicide terrorism against Israelis, but it becomes a very different matter when, again, the victims are not only other Muslims like the Shiites in Iraq, but also other Muslims like Sunnis in places like Jordan. I think there was a kind of a hinge in November of 2005 when Zarqawi sent 3 suicide bombers to blow themselves up in Jordanian hotels. And of course, these were foreign-owned hotels, but nonetheless, the 60-odd victims of those attacks, the vast majority of them were themselves Sunni Muslims. And we've seen a similar process happen in Pakistan in recent months, including with the murder of Benazir Bhutto, in which suicide terrorism has been turned with considerable ferocity on Muslim populations. And I think that has led to a really broad rethink in the Muslim world about the legitimacy, the utility, and the basic decency of what these jihadis are doing. And what Dr. Fadl has written fundamentally reflects that shifting wind.
Walid Phares, what do you think about that? The attack on the wedding in Amman, Jordan, the bloodshed not only in Pakistan but also places like Algeria and Iraq. To what extent has this Muslims themselves becoming the prime victims of terrorism affected the debate?
I'm a little bit more skeptical in terms of reading how the jihadist strategic mind operate. I don't think that those who have made the decisions to engage in jihad, meaning after being indoctrinated, looking at the bloodshed of civilians, that those people have changed their mind. The criticism which is leveled against al-Qaida is jihadist criticism. It's not liberal criticism or democracy criticism or anti-jihadi criticism, although it exists. But the ones we are considering now, including Dr. Al-Fadl and many others, are just saying, number one, strategically, what al-Qaida has done is wrong, because they've attacked the United States, and therefore we lost two regimes, or one regime, and the US took two Muslim countries. So they are as if they're saying, we are the realists, we should have been consulted in terms of when to wage jihad. It's not about jihad and international relations. It's about when and who, and basically these are realist jihadists. Number two, what also concerns me as an analyst of the movement is a concept of taqiyya. Let me give you an example. That's a simulation of the real far-reaching objective. The organization al-Muhajirun in Great Britain over the past few years, actually after 9/11, has claimed, al-Bakri and others of his leaders, that they have a mu'ahada, an agreement with the British government that as long as they are hosted in Great Britain, they will not attack British interests. And by the way, the British didn't know even that they were a party at this agreement. It's a unilateral agreement declared by this jihadist group. But then there were the attacks of 7/7 and the subsequent attacks or conspiracies to attack. And al-Muhajirun then caught in chat room said, well, we did this because we needed a basis to fundraise, we needed a basis to organize, but in fact, we will decide when jihad will supersede. So I'm not saying that Dr. Al-Fadl's comments are not important. His research is extremely important if well used by local governments and if well used in our war room of the war of ideas to make sure that the next generations are not impacted by the Salafi jihadism of al-Qaida. But this is not yet a criticism of the entire ideology. This is somebody from within the ideological realm and saying, you made strategic mistakes, you should have waited more, you should have done other things. Ultimately, they have the same objective.